Okay, let me just make a confession, and this might not be the best confession to make in this kind of company, but I don't really read too much fiction, and I'm not a great follower of fiction. This might have something to do with the fact that I'm a reporter. And you know, I just find real life so much more compelling, and I'm so fascinated by the ability of writers to capture this reality and weave narratives around it. And this is not easy, because this kind of writing requires passion, perseverance, and skill, all of which you will find in ample measure, in abundant measure, in Sonia Faleiro's The Beautiful Thing. Now, before we start off, I think we're just going to ask her to read a passage from it, and then we'll take the conversation from there.
Okay. Firstly, thank you everyone for being here. For those of you who haven't read the book, I just want to give you a 2 or 3 line sort of understanding of what the book is about. As Samar points out, it's a work of narrative non-fiction based in Bombay. It traces the life of a young bar dancer called Leela, who is 19 at the time that this story is being told. And I wrote about Leela because in 2005, a few months after I met her, the state of Maharashtra decided that bar dancers, girls like her essentially, were the cause of immorality in the city, and they were also the cause of crime. And so our very clever, at the time, Deputy Chief Minister of Maharashtra came to the conclusion that if he banned bar dancing, morality and crime in Bombay would be eradicated. So I'm not sure how many of you live in Bombay. Perhaps since 2005 you've lived in a crime and immoral free city, but certainly that has not been my experience. But I was so startled by this act of terror and violence that had been inflicted not just on a 19-year-old girl that I had come to know and become very fond of, but an entire community of young women. 75,000 young women, as a result of the ban, lost their jobs. And these were women of low caste, no class as far as much of Bombay was concerned, women who had no skills, who were illiterate, and therefore women who were eventually funneled into the sex industry. And I wanted Leela's story to be remembered, and I wanted to write her story because I feel that these acts of violence are committed against women on a regular basis. It's small acts, in this case a large act, and I wanted not to forget. I wanted us to understand with as much clarity as I could deliver as a writer who we are as a people and what we do to one another. So I'm going to start by reading a passage from the first half of the book. This was early on during my research. Leela called me up one evening and she said, I want you to come for a birthday party. And I was very anxious for our relationships to move ahead. And so I said, without even thinking twice, I said, done. And then just later on, several hours later on, I realized I should ask her whose party it was and where. And at about 11 p.m. at night, Leela informed me that the party was being held in Kamathipura, which is a red light district in Bombay, and that the birthday girl was a brothel madam, a hijra. And it was her 45th birthday, and it was all her fellow hijras and the sex workers who worked for her would be hosting the party. And she said, well, now you are invited, and so please come along. And so I did. And the events of that night, I left early, the morning that followed as well, because I left early in the morning. I remember coming home and feeling that I would never be able to write this book, because what I saw, if one can, you always say, it literally broke my heart, and of course we know that our heart cannot be literally broken and one still remains alive, and yet, if I've ever used that phrase and meant it truthfully, I think the events of that night literally broke my heart. And the image that I'll never forget is of, towards the end of the night, after all the food had been eaten and all the energy expended, somebody put on a song, an Asha Bhosle song. And someone else jumped up, put off all the lights, so the only light in the room came from the light of the moon. And the song was beautiful, one of the most classic songs from Amrao Jan. And as it started playing, I was looking down at the floor, I remember, and suddenly I looked up and I saw that every one of the hijras in the room was crying. And for me, when I think about beautiful thing and the violence that was inflicted on these young women, I will always think of those hijras, not because the hijra community was the primary victim of the ban, but of course there are hijras who were bar dancers, but because that sense of absolutely having nothing was something that was exemplified for me in that moment. So I'm going to read a scene for you from that particular evening, the birthday party in Kamatipura. Apropos nothing, Maya, who was sitting to the left of me, murmured, "Hijron mein himmat hai. Hijras have courage." I agreed. It was as much a part of their identity as long hair and saris. "I was born in Kamatipura," she said, placing her arm companionably around mine. Why should I lie? I was born next door in gully number 4. My mother fucked men. Perhaps they were low-quality men. Who knew? But we hardly ate. I had to look out for myself. Who knows if I smelled? Bad people always found me. My teacher raped me. Then I was raped again. When I was 10 years old enough to make my own decisions, I decided that if this was going to keep happening to me, then at least I should profit from it. I should eat from it. So I stood outside the theater. That one, she gestured towards the window, and I waited for men. That's when the hijras came for me. They said, "You fuck men, join us." I had become accustomed to such confidences. My friendship with Leela had convinced her friends to warm to me, and with their familiarity, they honored me also with trust. Since so many of their friends had suffered similarly, it wasn't often they found a listener. So they were delighted to be heard, and never reticent about sharing deeply intimate, even self-incriminatory details. Although I was shaken by their stories, I was never discouraging. Sometimes it felt that simply by listening, I was helping out.
Sonia, I know that perhaps you've grown tired of speaking about yourself and you'd rather focus on the book. But as you posed this introduction to the book, it just struck me that this book has come from an incredibly political place, right? Forgive me for the personal question, but is this politics a general interest in politics? Or is it the politics that emerges, that stems from being a woman and perhaps empathizing with the kind of violences that women face?
Yeah, that's a great question.
And I'll just add one more. The question of politics also comes is because most people today, English speaking or otherwise, have shifted to the term Mumbai, one that personally I don't like shifting to. But you use the word Bombay in the book.
Yeah.
So is this part of politics, or is it something else, in which case you could address that later?
Yeah, obviously, as a woman, I'm particularly sensitive to the lives of other women. It's very clear to me that women in India, the violence that they suffer. And when I mean violence, I just don't mean physical violence. I think often the worst kind of violence is, emotional. It's a deprivation. It's saying, well, if we can educate only one of our children and you are a girl, well, clearly you're not going to be the one who's educated because you will never work for the family. You will go away. If we can only go once to the medical dispensary, even though the vaccinations are free, if we can make that trip only once, in that trip, if we can vaccinate only one child, of course the boy will be vaccinated because boys are more valuable. So I think from very young age, and this is again in upper middle class, the choice of who to marry, the kind of work to do. I think these are decisions that women are not permitted to make. And it's very clear to me, not just in the course of my reportage, I come across women who are incredibly poor, and in the course of my daily life, I come across women who are incredibly privileged, and the deprivations are of a multitude. And I'm more sensitive to them naturally, but it doesn't mean that I don't have as much empathy for the deprivations that young boys suffer. Essentially, the deprivation that the poor suffer in general is to be deprived of being allowed to make decisions for themselves. What do I want to become when I grow up? This is a decision that only a middle class, upper middle class, a rich child can make. The poor child cannot decide what he wants to do with his life. So that's one part of the question. And in terms of Mumbai, you know, as most of you know, it was a name that was changed by the Shiv Sena. I don't believe in their politics. I don't believe in their politics of depriving incredibly poor, starving people who are coming from other parts of India from getting jobs in Bombay, because those jobs should be reserved for Maharashtrians. And it's not because I'm a minority myself. It is simply, I don't believe it is constitutional. I don't believe it is Indian. I think it just goes against just everything that is honorable about our citizenship, to deprive other Indians of their livelihood. And I would never consider using Mumbai. I wouldn't use it in my book, ever. I would not use it in any conversation that I have. Once in a while I slip up and I use it, but you know,